All right. I think we may be showing up on your Facebook page right now, but I never know until I actually see it. So I'm waiting and I'm babbling. Here we go. Yes, we are live. Okay. Now, hold on a second, everybody. You know, it takes me a minute to get us reoriented here. I want to put us back on Zoom. There we are. Hi, everybody. I am Susan Elizabeth Phillips, and I am here with, I can't say she's my new friend. We don't know each other well enough. So we have to see. This is author Kristin Harmel. Hi, Kristin.
How are you? Yeah, I'm still evaluating you. I'm not sure about this friendship yet. We'll see in the next half hour.
It could get ugly. It could get ugly. So here's how Kristin and I met. Kristin is part of this unbelievably great podcast called Friends in Fiction, right?
Yeah.
And Jane Ann Krentz and I were invited to be on it. And Kristin had such good energy. I was just drawn to her through the podcast. So that is why I invited her to be my victim. Not my victim, I mean, my interview subject. Kristin, first tell us a little bit about the Friends in Fiction podcast.
Oh, sure. Well, first of all, we loved having you and Jane on. We were so happy that you joined us. It's something I do with four other authors: Mary Kay Andrews, Mary Alice Monroe, Patty Callahan Henry, and Christy Woodson Harvey. We started it back in April, and we're live every Wednesday night at 7 o'clock Eastern. We have special guests. We talk about writing, and we've grown from just a couple hundred members to almost 17,000 now. So it's a great community to be a part of if you like reading, and we just like talking. So it's all good.
It started out as girlfriend chatting, just girlfriend Zooming, right?
It
And
did. It did. We had a Zoom sipping our rosé at the beginning of April and said, hey, I wonder if we could do this and actually reach our readers. And we did, and we've used it to help support independent booksellers too, because that was I'm sure you feel the same. It was such a concern we had, especially kind of at the beginning of this COVID crisis.
Yeah. Yes, because when Jane and I did it, we funneled all of our sales through my hometown bookstore, Anderson's Bookshop.
I remember, yeah.
Yeah, that was really, really fun. And you've had some heavy hitters on there. You had Delia Owens, who did Crawdads, and you had musicians on there too, right?
We did. We had my favorite band, Sister Hazel. It was awesome. We had so much fun, and it was so interesting to talk to them about storytelling through song, because it was such a different way to approach the writing process. But of course, we had the great Susan Elizabeth Phillips and Jane Ann Krentz, which was clearly the highlights. Obviously,
absolutely. Obviously, I want to talk about your book, The Book of Lost Names. But before that, you have quite a resume, almost girlfriend, because you actually started out in high school as a sports writer.
Yes. Yeah, I was a big weirdo. I always knew I wanted to write. I mean, that's what I wanted to do, and I kind of figured, well, why would I have to wait until I'm a grown-up? I can do it now. And so when I was 16, I began writing query letters to local magazines, cleverly omitting my age, and pitching stories about the St. Louis Cardinals, who were spring training in St. Pete, Florida, which is where I grew up. When I was 16, so I guess a junior in high school, I was in Major League Baseball, NFL, and NHL hockey locker rooms, talking to professional athletes and writing for magazines.
And I'm the one who writes sports book. That should be my background instead of yours.
I know, or I should be writing sports book. I sports books. I missed the bus on that, apparently.
Then you went on to the glam job reporting for People magazine.
I did. It was
interviewed, A-listers.
Well, that job was a lot of fun. I did get to interview a lot of celebrities in that job and do really cool things like go to the Super Bowl and things like that. But the stories that really stuck with me though were the stories about real people, which is one reason I still really enjoy People magazine, because it's not just about celebrities, it's about real people making a difference in the world. And I always appreciated that, and I liked the opportunity to write those stories too.
Yeah, but back to the celebrities. So when you interviewed them, were they just like one more interview to get through and they kind of applied and they give their rote answers, or did you ever get them to just kind of open up more? What was that like?
Oh, it was awesome. And some of them were like that. I mean, which I can't really blame them. I mean,
Yeah.
especially when they're in the middle of releasing a movie or, a time when they're very busy. I'm sure they're just inundated with requests and, they probably don't have a moment to themselves to breathe. But gosh, I had some really great ones. Patrick Dempsey was just such a kind,
Love it
generous,
so
open
much.
person. I mean, he's just, and he comes across as nice, but he really genuinely was. And then I ran into him a year later for something else, and he was like, "Oh yeah, you're the one who writes books." And this was before, I had big books or anything, like no
Right.
reason why he would have known me. And I was so touched by that he had remembered. So he was wonderful. I mean, there were a lot of great ones. Andre 3000 from Outcast wanted to go on a car ride because that's where he feels his most inspiration. So he wanted to talk in the car so we could talk through how he gets inspired. And I went to go interview the cast of Harry Potter,
I
and
saw that. I was getting ready to ask you. It says you
yeah, it,
3 times you interviewed them.
it was so neat. That actually wasn't for people. It was for a TV show that I was working for. And I get to fly to London and go to 3 different Harry Potter premieres and interview the cast each time. And Daniel Radcliffe was always such a gentleman. I mean, he always would offer me a cup of tea. I mean, I don't know where he was going to procure this tea from if I said yes, but he was always so lovely. It was just such a great experience.
That is really, really, really great. So while you were doing your magazine work and your freelance work, were you writing a novel at that time? How did that transpire?
Well, first of all, let me tell you, you have some really great questions. And one of the things I was going to ask you about your book was how you did your research, because I thought that the medical stuff was so accurate in Dance Away with Me. But now I'm seeing what a great brain you have for research. You're really
Oh,
picking out
quick
exactly
brain
that.
here. Going for the celebrity questions, right?
Well, no, but I mean, they're good, thoughtful questions. I've forgotten what you just asked me.
Oh, okay. Now we are definitely going to be girlfriends because that happens to me all the time. I was wondering if you were working on a novel when you were doing this and how that transpired.
Yeah, so it was kind of an interesting turn of events. I had always wanted to write novels, but I thought, I don't really have the maturity for this yet. I was in my early 20s. I was writing for People magazine, and I was very much on that kind of fast track. Like I wanted to interview as many people as I could and get my name in print as many times as I could. And it was destroying everything else in my life because I was so singularly focused on that. And then I think I was 23. My bureau chief called one day and said, "You've been working so much that you've run out of hours for the year." And it was May, and I couldn't work again until the end of August. But because I had been working on hours basically that I couldn't report, I had to hold them and report them later. I was going to be paid through the end of the summer. And it was at that same time that an opportunity arose to go live in Paris for the summer. I didn't speak French. I had minored in Spanish in college. Which really made me even worse at speaking French when I attempted it. So I went and lived in Paris for the summer, taking the summer off from People, and that's where I began writing my first novel. So it was sort of while working at People, but that was the summer that taught me that there was more to life than just being on that fast track, and more to life than trying to achieve things. So, and I really credit that summer in my life and really Paris with making me both the person and the writer I am today.
So you obviously formed a love affair with Paris and with French culture during that trip, right?
Yes, I
Yeah,
did.
you know what? I scratch that girlfriend thing. Your life is way too glamorous, and I'm filled with way too much envy. So you also are fairly prolific. You're doing about a book a year, is that right?
I am, yeah, and that's a comfortable pace for me because it kind of I have to sort of hit the same markers at the same time each year.
Mhm.
And I kind of find that if you give me more time, I'll take more time. I'm just a master procrastinator, so if I
Right.
know I'm up against a deadline,
Yeah.
I'll get the writing done. How about you? What's your pace like right now?
Well, I'm slow. I mean, if I can give myself 2 years for a book, and sometimes I hit it and sometimes I don't. Although the one I just turned in, which is coming after Dance Away with Me, I think I did in about 19 months, which is fast for me. Yeah.
Oh,
But I
great.
think people who have journalism backgrounds in general tend to write a little bit faster. So how many of your books have been centered in France?
I think 4 of the recent ones, which have all dealt with World War II. And then I wrote one book in that came out in 2008 called The Art of French Kissing. Not a real how-to guide, I promise. But that took place partially in Paris also. So yeah, that was kind of my first return to Paris.
So I got to tell you about my experience with the Book of Lost Names. Uh-oh, right? So
The friendship rides on this. Let's see.
I know it. I know. Well, it's going to be rocky going here for a minute. So I knew this book. I invited you to interview you just because I just felt a connection with you when we were doing the Friends in Fiction.
I
just
felt like that too.
And so I invited you, and then I saw that your book was about the French Resistance, and I went, oh. And it has to do with the fact that right now, during Corona, I feel like I want to cuddle up with comfort reads. And I know a lot of readers are like that. So I'm thinking, okay, it's French Resistance, World War II. This is not going to be a comfort read. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cheat on this interview. I am going to read, just read the advanced peek at the beginning of the book on Amazon, and I'll be able to fake it from there. So this is 2 days ago. So I start reading the advanced chapter 1 or 2, a couple chapters on Amazon, and I get to the end of that, and I'm like, oh no! I hit that buy button so fast. I just was enraptured. I had to see what happened in this story.
You.
And Kristin, I have to tell you, this is the only book I have read in one sitting. One sitting. I can't even remember the last time. I didn't get up from my chair except to go to the bathroom.
Thank you. I'm so touched. Thank you so much for saying that.
Is so intense. I mean, it is a page turner.
You.
The pacing in the book is really just the pacing in that book is masterful. Before I go on about it, give us the summary of the book.
Yeah, sure. And gosh, I'm so touched. Thank you so much. And yes, I guess we can be friends. That's acceptable. You passed the test. I'm just joking.
Bought, everybody, she can be bought.
No, and I also have to say, I hope we leave some time to talk a little bit about your latest book, Dance Away with Me too, because I had a very similar experience with yours. I was putting it off because I have so many books to blurb right now. And I thought, I kind of thought the same thing. Maybe I'll just read a couple of chapters and kind of be able to fake it. Not that I didn't want to read it, but just that I sort of felt like, I'm so busy. I have a 4-year-old. I have a book due in November. I'm just a little bit overloaded right now. And I started reading and couldn't stop. So I unfortunately read it in 2 sittings. I apologize, but it was only because I had to put my 4-year-old to bed.
I didn't have a 4-year-old. I just had Mr. Bill, so it wasn't an issue.
No, it was absolutely incredible, and God, just the way you tugged at all sorts of different emotions was incredible, and just these themes of redemption and love and letting go of the past to move forward. I just loved it, but we'll talk about that.
Thank you so much.
Oh my gosh, it was so good.
Yeah.
And the pacing also, I loved your pacing too. There wasn't a good place to put it down because I kept wanting to know what would happen next. But so the Book of Lost Names, which thank you again, you were so kind to say such nice things about it, is the story of a female forger in World War II who gets drawn into the French Resistance mostly by accident, and winds up helping save the lives of hundreds of children. So there's another forger named Remy whose path who she crosses paths with, and together they begin encoding the names of the children that they're trying to save in a book that she eventually begins to call the Book of Lost Names, hence the title. So at the end of the war, when both the book and
wait a minute. Okay.
Yes. I'm trying to give like the quick description. Sorry. Have I failed? Am I off the friendship list?
No, I mean, you're still a friend, but geez, I'm a little disappointed. So a couple points I want to make.
Okay.
Here. Well, in terms of the Book of Lost Names, what is so touching about this is the heroine is artistic, and so she stumbles into forging these documents, and they're like travel documents and all different. What are some of the different kinds of documents that she forges?
Well, yep, like you said, travel documents, which I actually can show you one. This is I pull this out at every time I have the opportunity. This is a Nazi issued travel pass issued in 1940, December 1940 in Paris. So this is exactly the kind of thing that forgers would have been forging during that time. So you can see like the Nazi stamp and all of these things. So yeah, she was forging identity papers. Travel documents that would have allowed people to travel, and particularly for these children, because a lot of them were too young to have identity documents. One of the things I found interesting was that what a forger would have to forge were baptismal certificates,
Ah,
which basically just made the child undeniably Christian or undeniably Catholic, as opposed to most of the children who were fleeing were
Jewish.
Jewish. So so that was really interesting.
The as she has to have false names herself,
Yes.
and as she's forging these children's documents, she has to give them new names. And this is a real crisis for her because she's taking away their names and she wants some way to let these children know, if it's ever possible, what their real names are, because some of them, they're 2 and 3 years old, they're not going to remember. And so she creates a code, and this is recorded in the Book of Lost Names. That was so fresh and so touching, her
Yeah.
passion for being able to do that. But she had to do it in a way that if anybody found that document, nobody could figure it out. So you're interested in coding, right?
I used to be very interested in math as a kid. So I don't think my interest in coding had necessarily survived into adulthood. But when I had this idea for the book, and I couldn't, for writing this book, and I couldn't figure out what I wanted to do about this code that I knew needed to exist at the center. So I did a lot of research into the actual codes, people who worked for the government were doing at that point. But none of that really felt like a fit for what a young woman would have come up with, or a young man would have come up with, sitting in this small town church library kind of in the middle of nowhere. And so I wound up coming up with a code based on a mathematical sequence I'd had a weird obsession with as a kid. So I used to think when I was a kid, like one of my dreams was that I was going to be famous for being the first kid to solve the unsolvable math problems that like no renowned mathematician could solve. I was a weird kid, and then I went into sports writing at 16. I was very bizarre, but I was probably 7 or 8, and I would lie in bed at night and run the Fibonacci sequence in my head, which was a relatively simple mathematical code, but that gets harder to do the higher you get in the numbers, because it's more complex addition. But I used to run that in my head all the time, and I had forgotten about it. And then it kind of came to me in a flash for this book, and that's the sequence they use as the basis of their code in the Book of Lost Names.
Do you have the book there?
I do, the Book of Lost Names.
Well,
Yes. Sits beside my computer for these sorts of things. So there's no code in this book. The code I came up with is fictional, but this is the real 1732 religious text that the Book of Lost Names is based on. So you can see, like the beautiful gilding on the spine, and like just these tearing leather and whatever. I mean, it's just such a beautiful old book. But for every time in the novel I mention the code or mention this book, I'm using real pages from the book to actually do the code
yes,
on.
I figured you were. That
Yeah.
is just that whole idea about the forger, I thought was such a fresh take, because
Yeah.
there have been a lot of novels about the French Resistance and World War II, and I thought that was just so fascinating, that
Yeah.
whole experience. Now, but it is an intense book, but man, once you start it, you just cannot stop. You are turning the pages so quickly.
That means so much to me. Thank you. And again, I felt exactly the same about your book. I thought it was so compelling. And with yours, I think such a big thing that drew me into it was how well and how distinctly the characters were drawn. And I think that's it for me, at least. That's a really difficult thing to do, to paint a character who seems so unemotional and so cold at first, like Ian North, the one of the main characters, seems at the beginning. And it was hard for me to see in those first few chapters of the book. I mean, I knew, obviously I knew from the description kind of where it was going, but you did such a good job of making him so realistically cold, and gradually showing us how he opened up and came to life. I thought that was it's something I think I could have done better in the Book of Lost Names. And I thought you just did it so truly. I mean, I wish I had had more of that dynamic with Remy, because you just did it so well, and it's what kept me wanting to read. And I was just so attracted to him and so drawn to him, and so he was so masculine and so complex, and like the things he was carrying with him, like the more layers you unpeeled, the more clear it became why he had become who he was. It was just so well done.
Oh, that is so lovely. Well, Remy is an amazing hero in that book. He, which of these characters came to you first? Was it Eva or Remy or the priest? Or, by the way, the secondary characters in this book, absolutely. And the other thing is, there is a mother-daughter story in here that is, it is so fresh and so interesting. That is another, that whole thread through the book really drew me in. So what was your entry character in the book?
Probably Ava. I mean, for me, it's usually the main character, the one whose perspective I'm sort of telling the story through. But I appreciate you saying that about Ava and her mother. I felt the same. I mean, I really liked that relationship, and I liked that the mother was cold and was not being supportive. I mean, it all made sense to me, but I've had, that's one of the things though that people have reacted to negatively and said like, oh, I really disliked that mother. And I thought, you know what though, I get that, but not everybody reacted to the war with heroism and strength and foresight about what the future would bring. I mean, I think it was very realistic to sort of bury your head in the sand and dig your heels in and say, you know, this is where I am and this is where I'm comfortable, and don't you dare try to change any of it, you know?
And that gives a freshness to the whole story, because it doesn't take the arc that a reader would necessarily expect. But I got it. I totally understood it.
Yeah.
And I think that was a real strength of the book. So, of course, you know, I'm going to ask this. Are you doing another novel set in this period now? What are you working on now?
I am, and then I really want to hear about the one you're working on too. But yes, it's due November 1st. We do not yet have a title, so now that we're new friends, I'm going to have to email you and be like, which of these titles do you like? Because we're in the midst. We're trying to decide this week. But yes, it's set during World War II, but it's my first in a while that has not been World War II France. It's actually going to be World War II Poland. So it's a little bit of a departure for me. And it is set mostly in the wilderness of World War II Poland, which is also really different for me. So that has been a completely different avenue of research. But I keep saying, I think that even though the story is going to be very different, I think the heart of it is going to be the same. It's going to be about, you know, figuring out that in the darkness, the ordinary can become extraordinary, and that you can find the light within you, and sort of all those things that, and it's actually funny. I'd forgotten about this until this very moment, but it was when you and Jane came on the show, and I think it was Jane who said, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Jane said it was some version of, we all have one story to tell and we keep telling that same story. Right. And I had never thought of it that way before. And that's what made me think, what's the story that I keep telling? And I think that's what it is. I think it's the ordinary becoming, you know, it's someone ordinary in the midst of darkness becoming extraordinary. And I had never put my finger on that before until she said that. So I need to send her an email and thank her for that, because it has clarified so many things in my own head about my own writing. But yeah, that's the next one. But I did want to ask, what was your entry point into Dance Away with Me? Just since, I mean, that was such a good question about.
It's such a stupid story. I'll tell you in a minute. But first,
okay.
That what you're saying about the story you want to tell makes total sense in light of what you were saying attracted you when you were working at people.
Yep.
The stories of the everyday, that makes absolute sense. That would be the carry through. Yeah.
It's crazy. I mean, it's so strange that back before, because I started off writing chick lit novels that I don't necessarily think, I mean, maybe they had a little bit of this theme, but I certainly wasn't doing it consciously. But it's so interesting to look back on my career and realize that the seed of that was kind of planted, or that was always in me and that was reflected through my work at People. It's odd when you look back and kind of see, with the clarity of being in the future.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, well, I had a dream. I was on a hiking trip in Sicily in a bad hotel, and I woke up in the middle of the night with this idea that I was going to, this brilliant idea about this book. And I was going to write about a Sicilian midwife in a rural village in the 1950s. In the middle of the night, this struck me as the most brilliant idea ever.
It sounds
Until the
fascinating.
morning came, and I thought, no, wait a minute. You're going to 1 week in Sicily, most of it on the trail. You don't know that much about Sicily, let alone 1950 Sicily,
Yeah,
let alone rural
yes.
Sicily. But I liked the idea of the midwife. And so I started thinking about it in contemporary terms. It was a messy beginning to that book in terms of my whole thought process.
No, it was just so well done though. Which character did you sort of enter through? Was it Tess because she was the
Definitely.
midwife then?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I wanted, because I'm really passionate about visual arts and
Yep.
I love museums, I like to do an artist hero. And I couldn't figure out, I knew that he was sort of a tortured artist at this point, but I couldn't figure out what his field of art was. And I was talking to my son one day, and he looked at me like I was stupid. He said, Mom, everything now is street art. And
That's awesome.
then I started researching that amazing, amazing world of street art and just
Yeah.
got totally hooked on it. So the hero is sort of an American ripoff of that great British street artist Banksy. And I love his work. So were you a reader from an early age?
See, now you keep thwarting me every time I want to ask a follow-up question because I'm so interested. I'm so interested in how you describe the art because it came alive so much for me.
The
I
reason I like doing interviews is because I've just gotten so bored talking about myself. It's so much more fun getting other people talk about it. I
no,
guess
but
I want people to read my book. I should talk about it, right?
you should because it's such a good book. I just finished it last night and I'm just overflowing with
All right,
questions.
whatever. Read it.
Beautiful. Yes, everybody read it. It's so good. So street art is not something that I know a lot about. But I felt like you really brought that alive for me. I mean, I walked away from that book or rolled away because it was like midnight last night. And I was like, oh, I'm exhausted. That was so good. And then I couldn't sleep because I kept thinking about it. But I went away from that book thinking I felt that I knew so much more, not just about the art and how it was done, but the
Yeah.
evolution of an artist and the soul of an artist. It was so interesting to me. And I just find it so interesting how people express their art. But the way he developed and the way that his art developed in the novel was such a smart way to tie into the overall theme of the novel. I just thought it was just expertly done. It was so good.
Oh, that is lovely to hear. At first, when I heard the term street art, all I thought about was graffiti. But
Sure.
as I started really researching it and looking at international street art, and for anybody who doesn't know anything about street art, just Google Banksy, Banksy, and look at this amazing, breathtaking, thoughtful work that he does. Um, and that was a huge inspiration. But I like writing about that whole artistic journey. I've written about writers before on that journey, and I guess maybe it's a comfort zone. But back to my question, Missy, because this is my interview.
Darn it. You're
So,
bossy.
were you always a reader? And what
Yeah.
is okay, then what is the first book you remember that just really grabbed your attention, where you all of a sudden, do you know what book made you fall in love with reading?
I don't know that I can say I know which book made me fall in love with reading, but there were books that stood out. The earliest reading memories I have, and which is interesting because I know my mother read to me all the time, but I
Yeah,
have very distinct memories of reading with my grandmother. And I think it's because those memories were fewer and further between.
exactly.
So I think that's why they kind of stuck in my head a little bit more. But actually, and I don't have it here because I knew you were going to ask me this, but I have it just because, like I was saying to you ahead of time, the walls that you are beyond your vision. It's just a mess of books. But I have such a distinct memory of my grandmother reading me this book when I was a little girl. Gus
Oh,
was a friendly ghost, and when she passed away, this was one of the things that that was in her home that I was able to keep. So that's such a lovely reminder of her. But I remember just being so into the Bobbsey twins books, the Nancy Drew books, the Hardy Boys books, and the ones my mom had read when she was growing up in the 50s. Because they were all stashed in my grandparents' attic. And so every time I went to visit, I get to borrow, the next dozen books or whatever, which I would fly through in 2 weeks. And then I'd have to wait until I went to visit again. So I loved those. And, the book that really, I feel like, made me sure that I wanted to be a writer was The Diary of Anne Frank, which I probably read when I was about 11 or 12. And it was the first time I realized that books had truly had the power to do more than entertain. Because I think prior to that, I thought books were for entertainment and there were other venues or other avenues if you wanted to change the world. And this was the first time I realized that if a book had such raw emotion behind it, it could change people's hearts. And that was one way to change the world for the better. So that book
how
didn't
old,
make me a reader, but it made me a writer.
how old were you think when you read Diary of Anne Frank?
Probably 11 or 12. I wish I could remember exactly the first time I read it. I mean, I read it a lot. I read it many times as a young teenager because it just, you know what? And I sometimes wonder, I was not, and this sounds weird because it sounds like I'm comparing my situation to hers, which it was nothing like that. But I went through a really rough time when I was about that age. I mean, rough in that, my parents were getting divorced and we had just moved and I was at a new school and I didn't know anyone. It was like all the upheaval that an 11-year-old could have. And
So you
somehow that
identify somehow with Anne because of that.
Yes, which sounds absurd to say because obviously there's no comparison, but the things that she experienced were just so human and so universal that I think I connected to that book and imprinted on that book, and it never left me. How about you? What was there a book that really made you into a reader or made you into a writer?
I was a slow reader. We moved after I got dropped into a first grade where the kids could all read and I couldn't read, and I had to stay
Gosh.
until recess to learn how to read.
Oh,
So it was a little bit of a struggle. And then in second grade, Mrs. Martin at the end of every class, she read a little bit of the Boxcar Children.
oh wow.
And I would sit there and just pray that the bell wouldn't ring because I couldn't stand the idea of not knowing what happened next.
Oh,
That book was it. That was the gateway. And from then on, I always had my head buried in a book. But that whole idea of the children being independent of adults, and the book doesn't hold up well now. You go back and you think, where was social services with the children?
that's so true.
Yeah. But that was just, that book was just absolutely magical for me.
How,
So
sorry, go ahead.
no, I was just pondering. I wanted to see, is there anything else? I'm just looking here.
Oh, you froze a little. Uh-oh.
You don't
Oh,
mind
so,
that?
so I'm so sorry, Susan. You froze. I missed the last thing you said. I apologize.
Okay. My one spoiler is I want readers to know that no children die in this book. Is that
No,
a bad spoiler to review? No
on
children die.
in my book.
Yeah.
Right. No children. You're right. I guess that's true. No children die on the page.
The
That's true.
book
You
is intense. It's an intense book, but I'm telling you, once you start it, you cannot put it down. So I am giving 2 thumbs up for the Book of Lost Names, because I think readers are really, really going to enjoy it. Before we cut out here, anything else that I did not mention you want to bring up? I want, Friends
well,
in Fiction podcast is great. Get Your Book is great. And I guess we're girlfriends now.
Oh, well, that was the last thing I was going to say. Did I pass the test?
Yeah.
Have I made it? Okay.
I don't know about if I did, but
Oh wait, but you didn't tell me about your next book. What are you working on?
oh, I'm not saying.
Oh man, I got conned into sharing mine with you.
No,
Friendship over. That's it.
I know. I just like pull out other information and then withhold my own. That's the way it is.
Very, very sneaky.
So anyway, Kristin Harmel, thank you so much for being with me.
Thank you.
Book of Lost Names And I look forward to having a chance to, I can't wait for the next book. And you've got a little backlist there that we can dip into too, which is
Well, I
very
mean,
exciting.
speaking of backlists, look at you. I mean, I feel like the rest of my year is going to be booked between blurbs and now the entire Susan Elizabeth Phillips backlist. It's going to be
You
busy.
just keep yourself writing, Missy, because we need more of your books. Bye,
Thank you.
everybody.
Thanks
Thank
so much for having me,
you.
Susan. Good to see you.
Bye bye.